Maybe I structured it a bit too much. I think everyone in the panel wanted this to be very informal chat. So we will keep it as kind of an informal chat. If anyone later in the Q&A, please add to our research. May I introduce the speakers? So we have Mr. T.K. Sabapathy, who everybody surely knows, is widely acknowledged as Singapore's most preeminent art historian, having dedicated the past 4 decades of his life towards researching the history of artistic development in the wider region.
What a life.
A highly erudite individual, Sabapathy possesses impeccable scholarly credentials, as amply illustrated by the prolific corpus of academic texts and articles that he has written. Much like the late Namasivayam himself, Sabapathy likewise chose the path of an educator, as illustrated by his tenure as a lecturer of art history at various educational institutions such as National University of Singapore, Nanyang Technological Institution, and National Institute of Education. Consequently, Sabapathy is eminently one of those who wish to learn more about a significant but long neglected aspect of the history of artistic development in Singapore. We appreciate this opportunity to listen to Mr. Sabapathy's appraisal of Namasivayam's invaluable contributions as an artist and teacher alike. I'm going to introduce next Woon Tien Wei. Tien is a notable local artist who is a member of the prominent artist collective known as the Artist Village. He's also the co-founder of an influential social activist organization known as Post Museum. Inspired by trailblazing artists from the Nanyang School, whose iconic visit to Bali was credited with initiating the emergence of modern art scene in Singapore, Woon and his peers from the Artist Village decided to imitate the example of their illustrious predecessors. However, the ensuing artwork of Woon and his companions substituted image of the bare-breasted Balinese female models from the original paintings with topless photographs of themselves, as if to satirically express their disappointment with the dramatically different social climate of contemporary Bali. We showed this work in June. We showed his topless Bali series from the Artist Village. Thus, Woon's own artwork illustrates the reality that the tradition of the artistic nude in Singapore has not succumbed to the forces of creative inertia. Woon is a Tien. Why am I calling you Woon? I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay.
Tien is also part of an artist collective called the Post Museum, and he'll be showing in the Singapore Biennale that opens next week.
Next week.
Yeah. Milenko Prvački, originally born in the former Yugoslavia, without country, however, Milenko Prvački eventually immigrated to Singapore. He has gained considerably acclaim as an artist, as evinced by the fact that his artwork has been displayed at numerous exhibitions in Europe and Singapore alike. Nevertheless, Prvački has not confined himself to being a practicing artist, but also gained reputation as one of Singapore's foremost art educators, having served as the Dean of the Faculty of Fine Arts at LASALLE, College of Fine Arts, formerly. He is still at LASALLE. In that respect, his career trajectory has been strikingly similar to that of his close friend, the late Namasivayam, who was similarly a deeply committed and diligent pedagogy when it came to nurturing the next generation of budding artists. Prvački's valuable insights into the life and practice of Namasivayam will be deeply appreciated by art connoisseurs who wish to learn more about one of the dedicated pioneers of the tradition of the artistic nude. And we didn't announce this because we had a visit I had a great chat with Sentha, Namasivayam's daughter, who actually had followed Namasivayam to a lot of his life drawing courses, actually really supported his father's practice, and herself is an artist of sorts. So it's quite a treat to be able to have her in this panel today. It was really important to bring her here. Sentha Wouterlood is the co-director and therapist at Anahata Mystery School. Correct? She has worked for more than 20 years in holistic health, yoga, dance, and education. Her experience includes managing and supervising detox spas, health consulting, secondary school teaching, public and private sectors, dance therapy, yoga teaching, craniosacral therapy, stress management, and nutrition counseling. She was previously an assistant manager at New You Samui. She's also a performance artist and was involved with theater works and stage works. And she's the daughter of the late Namasivayam. But we can talk about the context of the art scene at the time. Perhaps you can give some valuable insight. We could probably talk about some of the formal qualities of the art as you see it from your point of view. And we can share any sort of personal anecdotes that you may have that that could be interesting to hear. So the question to you is, assuming that Namasivayam was, he had the sketchbooks, as you've seen in the exhibition, assuming that he was dedicated to his education practice with his sketchbooks and some paintings that he did at home, and he really concentrated on drawing the figure with Group 90 during the 90s. I'm really curious to know what the climate at the time for this kind of life drawing practice or sessions were like in the time of the 80s, 90s, maybe even early 2000s. So from the point of historian, from Sabapathy, from the point of what the artist village was doing at the time. The artist village was very dominant at the time. From what I understand, they were doing really exciting conceptual performance works. And Milenko, from the point of view as an artist and educator, what was it like during that time in the school, with the artists? And Sentha, from your experience of following your father around to doing his activities, may I open to you?
That's a huge question. 80s and 90s. In the introductory remarks by Jolene and Lilian, they pretty much intimated the complicated and difficult position of drawing the human body institutionally and in terms of such institutions of art that existed at that time. It does not mean that it was completely absent. I would say that it was intermittent, occasional, here and there, spotty. And there are enough anecdotal data and information to substantiate such an impressionistic view. It is among those practicing artists who sought their education outside Singapore, either in Europe, the United States of America, and in the case of Namasivayam in Australia, where at that time in the 60s and right up to, I would say, the 70s, drawing the figure as life drawing was a defining attribute of developing certain capacities and skills for the person in the studio. And he came through that particular stream. You relayed Eng Teng's remark about the rare occasion when the figure was permitted to be seen and drawn in the Nanyang Academy of Fine Arts. May I say that it was not particular in Singapore. And, pardon my saying this, it's not much use to say that because we are irredeemably conservative. That doesn't explain anything. I think one has to really ask, why is the representation of the body as an unclothed entity presents such complicated and difficult issues? And my knowledge of Southeast Asia, the modern in Southeast Asia since the last quarter of the 19th century and throughout the 20th century, testifies to the comparable complexities and difficulties in Southeast Asia. The only location in which the nude proliferated in Southeast Asia was in the Philippines, in Manila. And this was largely due to the Spanish academic stream that was instated in the Philippines. And there was a very strong pedagogical insistence on the study of the figure. But for the rest, it was somewhat furtive. And it's in this sense, I believe, that Namasivayam and Sim Tong Kearn, Choi Wing Yang, and Liu Kang, and Chia Wai Hon and company came together informally to to present themselves as a group. And I think it's weekly, right? Every week you met to study the figure. And I think it's the only such collective that existed in Singapore, specifically devoted to the study of the figure. There were ad hoc meetings here and there by artists here occasionally, but never as programmatically developed as it is. That you might even say that there was a manifesto for the nude amongst the group of the 90. I think I'll stop there for the moment in terms of trying to describe an atmospheric sort of condition in which this was practiced.
Maybe Milenko?
Maybe Tien, because when I came, it existed even
Group 90.
Not yet Group 90, but Art Village existing, and they started usually in 90. I came in 91, so maybe that context, which for me it's very interesting about existence of Art Village and this group, it's coincides somehow, even different.
Right. But actually, just to explain myself, I'm actually from the Artist Village, but I'm not the original founding member. So we kind of came, me with a group of friends, came into the Artist Village maybe in the very early 2000 or very late 99 or something like that. So, oh, okay. And if you, and basically, I think that maybe historically the Artist Village has been known to be in the late 90s to be pushing for some art forms like the performance art and installation or more time-based work. But the name came about also because they were located in a farmland, kampong place in Ulu Sembawang. That's how the name sort of came about, I guess, right? But that being said, that whole generation of artists, the few of us, mainly we came back either from studies or we came out from army, right? I mean, so we were looking for a place to sort of practice, and I think the Artist Village sort of fueled our imagination. But out of everybody that's involved in the Artist Village, actually none of us have been to the Ulu Sembawang space, except for one person during primary school. And another artist sort of didn't go to school. He played truant, and then he went to the museum, and then he saw Tang Dawu perform. But that's about it, actually. So, and this is actually, some of these pictures are from the exhibition called 20 Years, the Artist Village Show. But what I wanted to sort of talk about, actually, is that actually I've been sort of working through this idea of the incuratable, but also maybe in the context of Nama's work, actually, and this exhibition that's being put up to sort of lay his work and to have a look at it seriously. Because for me, I was interested in this idea of the incuratable, what cannot be curated in the institutional context, in the canon of art history, that the incuratable sort of falls outside of what doesn't really get included in history. So what I was really interested in was looking at this, to think about curatorial, to think about art history, but in relation to nationalism, ideology of society, and also some kind of hegemony that was going on in Singapore at the time. And also to look at censorship as well, because things that are censored also gets incurated, because it doesn't appear in books, it doesn't appear. So what I think maybe what I wanted to sort of draw into this in the Artist Village context was that what we see in a lot of the exhibitions are actually artworks, a lot of artworks that were made by different artists, but what I was interested in was how do you kind of tell the story of collectivity? So in a way, how do you tell the story of Group 90, for example, other than the artworks? Because it's much more than the artworks. It's that relationship that they built, right? To meet every week, to study the figure is something. Because and I think for me to think of art history as a way of imagining what it would be like, because I don't know if people find that one day in a week to commit yourself to do something. So in a way, I felt that was interesting, that maybe we didn't really, if we look at only the artwork without the relationship, without the context, without the place that they were creating, I think that we might lose some of the context of that. So okay, anyway, that's what I thought. Does it kind of say what?
But during the, I guess my question is, during the the 90s and everything, the Artist Village was doing very interesting things. I mean, while we were doing our research, we heard, I obviously had to ask the question, why is it that we hadn't really heard of a lot of these artists?
Which artists?
The Group 90
Right.
artists.
Okay, yeah. Actually, unfortunately, this is such a long story. I don't want to hog it, but this is something I've been thinking about, right? That actually towards the 90s, you start seeing a shift of, there used to be something called the Singapore Art Show. I don't know if everyone remembered them, right? Yeah. But we kind of laugh at it, but actually, you really think about it, it's one of the more democratic space in terms of that it had an open call. People could submit it. I submitted. I think I got rejected all the time, right? But what it was it sort of opened the space in a different way. But what we see today is a certain professionalization of the arts. That today, our arts is professional, it's international, it's clean, it's contemporary. So I think one of the things that I felt was really missing in terms of being interested in looking at our past was that we actually missed out a lot when we only think of contemporary as a certain look, a certain trend. And we lose a lot of the points and why it's important. And that becomes really difficult. And I think maybe later on I will show you, anyway, if you go back one slide, this is a joke anyway. So this is the durians of the Ulu Sembawang, and then that's 1990, right? And then this is the durians of the 2000, right? So we need to understand that this is a lot more expensive than the D40 and the Mao San Wang durians. I cannot remember how much it cost, but that money pumped into the art world changed everything. Maybe it confused us as well. So maybe later on I can share about the Bali project and how Sabah actually changed my mind about some things along the way.
So yeah, very interesting to think about how curators are making the aesthetic or determining the look and feel of contemporary art and what's exciting, I suppose. Yeah. Milenko, you want to add something?
I'm sorry we are talking now about Nama. There are many reasons why I'm saying this, because nobody talks about him except people who knows him, who knows his passion, people who works with them, and us from LaSalle where he was teaching. I want to congratulate Audrey and your team. I was asking Tien to talk before me because when I came in Singapore, it was three things usually. It was all about pioneer artists. It was all about Art Village, which started then, and I still remember first show in that warehouse, which was totally dusty and unusual space in what you mentioned about the institution now and then. And I want to talk about undiscovered artists. And Nama wasn't someone who was thinking about to be successful, to be well sold, to be anything else than to do what his passion is about, and that was about live drawing. And in the same time, it was very difficult in Singapore to find someone who is so articulated and passionate. He was really, I was shocked that looking at Indian men talking old-fashioned British accent, that was shocking for me. But because I have Slavish accent, so it's. And other point, which as a situation that time in 90s when I came, was LaSalle College of the Arts, where he was teaching. And when I started teaching in LaSalle in 94, because only few of us lectures, because Brother Joseph McNally didn't have much options. But I know that I started teaching also live drawing, because I studied in Bucharest, in Romania, during Ceausescu time, and even master program we have to do light drawing. It was very academic, like some before in China or Russia. So it was pleasure for me after so many years to do again light drawing with students. But his syllabus was so well done, like he understood all light drawing is this word. So it opened me opportunity to experiment, explore with students who already got some knowledge about live drawing. And live drawing is not only about what we see that artists did. Live drawing sharp our perception, our ability to observe. And that's what Arnheim and Merleau-Ponty talk about. I think that observation skills are primary. You don't even have to be artists, but there's opportunity to know how to look at things and how to judge. So I think that to summarize, in Singapore happened these very different things. Traditional one, very contemporary one, and unknown one. But what I want to say that Singapore in that time was young, was fresh. Everything was fresh. And looking at his drawings now, I'm not surprised he quote Picasso, because his drawing is sharp. It's like with knife. It's very confident. And he didn't pretend. He was just enjoying doing this. Maybe enough for this moment.
Thank you. Sentha, just to go back a bit, I want to continue the discussion about some of the formal qualities that you mentioned, and I'll come back to that. But Sentha, just to step back a little bit, what was the experience like when you followed your father? You were often with your father when he was painting, and he would teach you ways of seeing, and you would join these Group 90 life drawing sessions with him. What was it like? What was the reception of people, and some of your experience of working, with that group in that sense?
Well, that probably covers several questions.
Yes,
so
sorry.
I'll probably just jump in and come through with maybe having a sort of foundation laid out. Can you hear me at the back? Yes? Thank you. Well, we have here these pictures that Dad produced, which were focused on the human form, which was, of course, his passion, and he drew inspiration from. But perhaps from my viewpoint, I'd like to lay out a little bit of contextualization of how this passion of his for the form was both the starting point for art for himself, as well as the impetus for all other forms of art that he was equally interested in, and found that they were not separate. As an example, even when I was very young, what I recall very much was Dad's love of nature. He loved going through for walks, which he did throughout his life, into the woods and the jungles. We often took trips to Malaysia. And I remember an incident once. I was quite young. And back then, they actually had a few tigers left. So it was a long time ago. But it was quite dark. And there was this creature just lying across the road, and the headlights were going to startle it. So Dad, who was driving, turned the lights down and said, "Be very quiet, just watch. Watch that creature." I was sitting in the back seat quite riveted, and he said, "Look how the headlights have startled the creature. Look how when we've settled the lights down, it starts to quieten itself." And we could see, he said, "Look, it's breathing softer now. Let's not move, let's wait." And some of the others in the car, whom I won't mention right now, were a bit worried. They said, "Well, look, is it going to attack us?" and so on. And Dad said, "No, this is nature. We are not separate from it. As human beings, we are part of something far bigger. We are not the most important thing here. We have to engage and allow ourselves to participate in the whole platform and parade of life that we see before us. And here at this moment, we are simply spectators and participants. There lies the subject." And as we watched, he said, "Let's watch the subject, be quiet, and allow it to do what it needs to." And of course, after some time, the creature got up and walked across the road, allowing us to drive through. But I mentioned this incident as an example of how Dad was constantly seeing how in day-to-day life, the variety of things that came across his view and around us were all participants in nature as a whole. And the human form was to him really not purely a figure to be disassociated, a skeletal form. The anatomy is correct, and from my own experience years later of working in this field and studying it, we had incredible discussions about the detail and precision of these things. But to me, as someone who was looking at it from a very personal viewpoint, it's always been not the most important aspect of his observation. More so was observing nature move. As another example, if I may mention, walking through the woods and in the jungled area of Malaysia and parts of Singapore in the old Pierce Reservoir section, which he loved. He loved bodies of water, everything from the Pierce Reservoir to years later finding parallels in it, as he said, when wandering through the Lake District in the UK. And what he noted was on one of our walks, the changing light and how light filtered through the canopy and expressed itself as the light shifted over a block of wood, rotting wood, that most persons, I suppose, would walk past and ignore. But Dad said, look at this incredible marvel, this block of wood, and see how the light transforms it in different ways. And everything was noted, from the change of texture to the dimensionality of it, to the smell, to the fact that when the light shifted, suddenly a little bit of moss started to make an appearance, which you didn't see a little while earlier. And for Dad, this was no different when he started to get to the canvas and look at the human form of a person. Although he didn't speak directly about it, as someone who watched how his process happened, it was very clear that all these experiences of seeing what was happening in nature outside translated into how he observed the human form. So a person who was about to take a sit, the model, for instance, in this case, was not a subject that he merely viewed as a static form who was positioned and placed in a certain way so that other artists could start to draw. One of the things that Dad often did was, prior to actually beginning a sketch, he would sit very quietly, he was often very quiet in these times, and simply observe the sitter entering the room, having a cup of coffee, just she or he limbering up and stretching, tilting the head and shaking it, and just feeling themselves into a space of comfort or discomfort. He noted these expressions. He would also notice how the light filtered in through the door of the studio as people shut and opened the door. And it was clear when he started to draw the actual picture that these impressions of the person that he saw a few minutes earlier were not disassociated from the actual subject who was now in a static form. And I would have to say that that to me has always been one of the reasons why, for myself looking at it, I'm sure others may feel that way too who've seen his work, that the dynamic movement quality and the intensity with which the forms seem to come into a life force on the paper or canvas were not simply from observing the sitter over that space of an hour or two, but by including whatever notes he had observed and taken mentally, not necessarily always sketching, by the way, even though he did that all the time. A lot of the time it was also mental that he observed. He saw the light came through, and if you do go next door and see one of the pictures that he's done of cosmic balance, that came directly from a walk partly in the woods sometime before, where, as I said, a light filtering through. It was a piece of log, but as you see, there was this organic sense of the human form being no different from a log or a wood or a tree, and the human form was purely for him an embodiment of what he saw as nature.
Good question, because now
Yes.
I pass by, sometimes I'm passing by a studio in LaSalle, looking at them with mobile, with some object on mobile, and they copy from mobile. That time, it's nonsense, because the light drawing, what I mentioned before, it's about perception. It's not only reproducing, and it's not only about mimesis, I copy something somewhere. It's about observation skill, and not necessarily will or should be only art, but could be extended. And if you look at Nama's work, sketches, it's abstract things, they're all kind of things. But what you mentioned about him, that he had amazing perception skill, that's what he developed during live drawings. And the second part, which was difficult, is in Singapore, was the models. He developed this idea of foreign tourists going through Singapore in Thailand, Philippines, or Indonesia, that they discover one of these backpackers hostels, and he just put a poster that LaSalle College of the Arts needs some models, $70 for 2 hours or something like this. And that's how it started. So when I came on spot in '94, it was developed already. So we couldn't have any local models. And so it was whoever, it was mutual kind of advertising, you know, that, oh, you're going in Singapore, just go there, you can make some money, go 3 months in Indonesia, come back, do again modeling. And it was really developed. Only around I think in 2000, it started that we can use local models, and very limited and very selective number. And I'm sure that Group 90 did the same thing.
Cannot use local model.
No.
Who say cannot?
No, nobody say it. Nobody say it.
Don't have.
No, you have, as long you have model, it's naked, it's localized in LaSalle in school, it's fine. But local models didn't want to. So it's a kind of different culture that you mentioned in your research. Yeah. So that was the problem. And second, it was difficult to exhibit in official space, because we have case of 2 years ago when Vincent Liao showed some naked woman on rooster, and it was a scandal in 21st century. So that's demonstrate that the audience could be very conservative, and now it's different.
Yeah.
But
if I can just bring in that point, I quite agree with that, Milenko, that aspect. And I recall many times Dad being quite crestfallen, coming back and having to call some of his friends in Group 90 to say, we couldn't find a model this week. I've tried. And he's gone to some, as you said, some backpackers hostel, and everyone thought he's either an eccentric old man, or not so old back then, but eccentric, or a bit of a perv, so to speak. And I often got flack myself, went to, walking around, be some person I didn't even recognize. A complete stranger will come and say, are you the daughter of Mr. Nama? I say, yes. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. My sympathies. It must be terrible to have that sort of father, who goes around drawing people, in the nude. And I heard that a lot, I can tell you that. And later on, years when I went off to, as I've told Audrey, to accompany Dad, which I loved because I was overseas a lot of the time. And on my visits to Singapore, I was very happy to accompany Dad. It was a way of sharing for me with Dad. It was our daughter-father time. And I would ride the bus together with Dad when LaSalle was in the old, Uncle Sim might remember, the Telok Blangah campus, when Brother McNally was around, and Liu Kang, a few others, and Mr. Low, and lovely to see you, by the way. And it was a great joy, and it would be a last-minute thing. But at the same time, there was still that perception of leaving and having to face, as you say, from persons who have traveled abroad, been educated in art history and so on, but felt somehow the separation of what they felt could be shared or exposed in art in Singapore versus the ability to do that outside. In other words, we can do art, but as to the nude, let's not bring that in here. Let's keep that quite private, as you said, within the studio section. And I must say that Dad was actually not terribly happy about this at times, because he did, at moments, just in a huff, say things like, how can you possibly confine the beauty, the dynamism, the life force of what is human within the confines of a studio. It has to be out like all nature, participating in life. And I do feel that Dad's work was his attempt to draw that life force that was not allowed outside the confined space within the context of art here at the time, and the ideas about the human form. It was his attempt to insert that, the external, brought into and united in the studio art form.
So we realize go ahead.
Yes, please.
I think many of the recollections that you have expressed, in my opinion, are vitally important in looking back and looking into what he has produced. And they are disclosures, they are more than disclosures, they are your reflections which would not normally feature in any kind of appraisal of any work of art. And going back to Tien's earlier remark about what is curatable and what is not, what is representable and what is not, is a perennial matter. It's not time-based at all. And it brings the matter of the figure to several points of crisis on this matter, more than any other representation. Because it is the body, it is our body, it is your body. And the transposition between a graphic image that's out there and who and what you are is a very tenuous thing. And it's transferable, one between the other. Hence, on the one hand, an aversion, on another hand, anxiety, and on the other hand, total elation. I mean, it can work along this spectrum. And you have hit the nail, several nails on the head in asking, and I think this was mentioned by the two researchers too, what is this problem with the body that we are sort of in a kind of a quandary? Why? And I think you have exposed some of these particular problems. That Nama himself has adopted a somewhat poetic philosophical view whereby all of his world, both actual and imagined, can be encapsulated in the figure, is a way, in my reckoning, listening to you, of circumventing some of these things. But he still faced problems. He did not, by his own private and individual cognizance of these things, solve anything. And we are continuing to deal with it. But again, the matter of what is curatable, what is representable, is partly at the heart of it. So the human figure, if you walk into any gallery today, especially the public galleries, we are plagued by advisories. And the frequent advisory that comes up is, be warned, you are going to see an exposed breast here. Be warned, you're going to see a partial nude figure here. Everywhere, even in the National University of Singapore, there is a room devoted to Jimmy Ong's drawings, and there is that advisory. Beneath a caption of Jimmy Ong and the figure, be warned. Yeah. So this double take continues, and there are a number of pictures that are on display in the Southeast Asian, permanent Southeast Asian collections with very forthright representations of the unclothed figure. And invariably the unclothed figure predominantly is the female, as in Namasivayam's pictures too. It's predominantly the female, which is another whole bunch of matters that, oh, you are female, the three of us, here we are talking about all these representations of nudes and we are the male voices. Yet someone like Namasivayam has not made it in that thing. And I think in part, in my reckoning, and this is not trying to ameliorate or forgive any party involved, in part, I think Namasivayam was not too concerned and interested in professionalizing his practice. I don't think he was too concerned with professionalizing it. It does not mean, therefore, that he was not interested in the gravity of what he was producing, the profundity of what he was producing. Yes, professionalizing in the manner by which one gains clienteles, one gains publicness, one gains notice. Yeah. In looking at this, Namasivayam is well entrenched in a particular artistic tradition, including the conventions that govern that tradition. You talked about the European origins of it, but by the time it is practiced here, it doesn't really matter that it is of European origin. It is domiciled here. It is domesticated here. However, infrequently it is done, but it is there. It is that Group 90's definition of the figure, or multiple definitions of the figure, including what you have described as his. So the figure has a particular niche in the art of Singapore, but that niche has not been sufficiently studied, looked at, and developed. And this is where we are now. So in that sense, I will echo Milenko's remark to you, congratulate you in undertaking this enormous task, and I can see that you are somewhat overwhelmed by it also, by what you have, by the materials that you have. And looking at the sketchbooks, albeit very briefly, there is the repertoire of this man's visual field, as you described it. And in looking at that, you can see why the figure assumed the prominence and the dominance it does in his scheme of things. It's not that he was oblivious to the others, but there he was. Let me just, and I promise to shut up after this for a while.
No, thank you. Please don't.
I was dusting my bookshelves this morning, and I think I've been at pains in remarking this, trying to draw the compass a little wider. I mean, is this representation of the figure and its complexities, problems, inhibitions, taboos peculiar to Singapore? No. And where does this come from? One of the sources. This is an artist from Malaysia, an exact contemporary of Namasivayam. Whether they knew one another doesn't really matter. He too, like Nama, went to an academy, not in Australia, but in England, Chelsea School of Art, one of the blue ribbon academies for the study of art. For those of us who are part of the British Empire, we probably still are. I mean, no people are more enamored of our colonial past than we are. Yeah, we keep constantly celebrating it, and never mind. But this is Jin Leng saying, the human figure, you could almost hear Nama saying this. The human figure is the most difficult subject to draw because it represents not only anatomical problems of form and structure, but also movement, points of articulation, which is what? To do with mobility, with movement, with shifting of not only joints, but the entire breathing, respiring body, but also movement, even when the figure is sitting or lying still. There is a movement within, in any pose or stance, affecting the outer layers of flesh, muscle, and forms constituting the body, until the internal structure of the anatomy and how movement within the skeletal structure affects the outer muscle and sinew forms are understood, no artist will be able to draw the human figure with satisfactory conviction. I have had about 8 conversations with Mr. Namasivayam, and he never tired of saying this. He never ever tired of saying this. Those skeletal and anatomical drawings are the heartbeat as far as the graphic realization of the form is concerned. That's where it begins, and that's where it goes back to constantly. Mr. Lowe will also say exactly, I've talked with you and recorded your remarks. So this is where the convention, the institution of the representation of the body, including the acuity and sharpness of observing, coalesce. And Mr. Namasivayam, including his colleagues in Group 90, epitomized this week after week after week, even when the model wasn't there. They imagined the model. Back to you with your non-curating things.
It's a joke because that time when usually the oldest group started in LaSalle because Mr. Lowe was the dean of Faculty of Design. Brother Joseph McNally was the president of LaSalle, so it was quite natural that, and Nama was teaching in LaSalle, that they start there, and that campus was quite big. We moved in new campus 12 years ago, and I was dean of LaSalle, and they moved over there, but I don't know after I stepped down what happened. I don't see them anymore. But that's without model, it's a problem with when we start getting local models. Usually, first local model in LaSalle was male, was Gordon. You remember Gordon? No. He was you know him. It's Gilles' partner.
Oh, Gordon.
He passed away. Yeah, he was the first model local and was male. But many times they will just have something happen in family, they don't appear. And I was doing class, light drawing class, and my wife was there. I said, take off your clothes. And she got shocked because I can't do run class without model. So that was first time and last time my wife was a model. But anyway, but it was another fine story that when we start getting these young backpackers, one Swedish lady came, a young lady, 18, 20 years old, beautiful, and after 2 hours I realized nobody's drawing. Looking at model. And then when we finished class, no results, and I was asking, do you have boyfriend here? Yeah, can you call him tomorrow, please? So next day, boyfriend came because they couldn't draw. They was looking on them. So that's but it's also culture. But I do absolutely everything you mentioned before. It's that I'm not talking about creating and not possible or impossible. I'm not talking about evaluating even. I'm talking about documenting what someone else is doing. And then let time see, but you have to have in documented what every artist is doing here. And you never know what is going to happen. When I saw first time you show a show of Artist Village in that warehouse, half of this could, that old story that cleaners will throw half. But most of these looking like rubbish things, installations, most of these artists are famous artists now. And you can't judge always that this is good, this is not good, this is for museum, this is not for museum. But documenting, that's a job that they should do. Like in bus company, you have evidence of every bus and every bus driver.
May I open to the floor for questions, if there are any, please? Yang Yilin?
Just wanted to say thank you very much, Audrey, for putting together the show. And thank you. I'm really appreciative of this panel, partly because I did my entire PhD on the nude, studying and trying to understand the nude in the past 6 years, and it's really hard to get resources. So just even having the idea of a panel sit together and talk about it is something that was missing for the last 7 years of me studying. So I really appreciate it. One of the things I wanted to add to the conversation is about the contemporary use of light drawing in education. So a lot of the shift has gone into animation school, because in animation, especially in 2D and 3D, you're studying the mechanics of movement. So light drawing has been taught in LaSalle, in NTU, in NUS, we're teaching, under the guise of for animation rather than for fine art. So I just wanted to ask the panel a little bit about this shift. An interesting thing about Group 90 was when light drawing was introduced to LaSalle was for under the institution of design. And then now it's shifted to animation. And it was never a part of fine art. And I'm curious about what the panel thinks.
No, it's always been part of fine arts. It started with Nama, who introduced syllabus for fine arts. When I came in '94 in LaSalle, it was that syllabus still on, and we are still doing live drawing in LaSalle. We never stop it. It's just approach is different. When I mentioned that I did my master in Europe and I did still live drawing, even I should be focused only on research and writing, but this was very academic. When I came and I inherited for Nama, it was still classical kind of live drawing. Now it's like when I did presentation, I spent 2 hours in library to choose slides and do my presentation to students. And now you mention the name, and in 2 seconds they have on their mobile. That speed change. So they don't stand 3 hours and do one live drawing. They don't observe anything. They're sketching usually. So that's because of speed, and no one is doing anymore these kind of things, unfortunately. But what I mentioned before, live drawing is not only about reproducing, it's about observation skill. It's about looking at things. And live drawing is not only body, could be landscape in some position, could be everything, contain sharp structure, space, dimension. It's different values in.
If I understand your remark, and apropos of your general observations of your father's sort of belief systems, if I can refer to that. Perhaps we can also think about the figure as the body, and thereby expand the arena whereby that thing which we recognize as conforming to the human shape and the human form takes on representations in different technologies like the ones that you mentioned, and because of those technologies, the imaging that results is particular to the way in which the technologies are developed. And in fact, one may say that compared to the anxiety over the nude, drawn, painted, the new technologies are even more fearful, in the sense of what they then can transform the body or make the body do things which are totally unimaginable physiologically, but still out there to be perceived, to be seen, to be observed. Perhaps in that sense, the nude will then assume a much more comfortable position with regard to that. I don't know. But I take the point that you make. Tien talked about performance art. And when I was looking at these representations of the body, I was thinking of someone like Amanda Heng and her representation of herself and her mother in those large photographic, discreetly cut off at a kind of a portrait bust level. And in the third APT, Amanda performed completely unclothed in the corridors at the Queensland Art Gallery. And I guess she felt that she could do it in Brisbane, but not in Singapore. And she did it. And there is a videograph representation of that representation. So these are equally flashpoints whereby the anxiety, the fear of representing the body can be brought home even more forcibly. And now with the media in your hand, you don't have to go to the gallery to look at it. You can carry it in your pocket, you know, and it's there with you. So that's a whole dimension. I think you're quite right in drawing our attention to, although you talked about animation, there's more to it than animation in the representation of the body. I'm not sufficiently competent with these technologies to be able to elucidate them any more than these general remarks, but they are there. I know they're out there. Sounds like,
But
like
also
you know,
you wanted to...
I'll come back or something like that.
I think, but you also, I didn't get it, but you were saying that then nude drawing classes then become like not from in the fine art department. Is it something like that?
The figure is...
I really appreciate both responses, but one of the things I was drawing attention to is the way the new field has changed and shifted, also for the different technologies and what it's meant to be. Performance art, and animation, and media, in VR, the study of live drawing has continued, but takes on a very different kind of form in contemporary educational space and artistic space as well. And I think that it's very part of the work that I do is to track what happens now beyond the modernist kind of classical academic 18th century background of studying to newer forms of how I also taught like how do you teach live drawing? How do you teach live drawing today? Beyond the classical beyond what is the conformed the female classical traditions of history.
Right.
Well, you're going to have a live drawing class
Yes,
here, isn't it? So I dare say that will be a platform to intimate some possibilities.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's right. As part of the programming we have, Dr. Yan Yun Chen will do a live drawing session on the 30th of November. I believe it is fully subscribed.
Oh, wow.
But we can open
Fully
a couple
subscribed.
tickets, so please email us. And if we need to open another one for the sake of sharing with the community, we will do it. So, yes, okay.
Can I just like add also like actually one of the thing I think is also this panel has touched on was like why are whether some people are represented and why people are underrepresented. But I think that one of the problem what I mentioned maybe not so clearly was that actually is the art scene so diverse that we can absorb everything. It's not that new drawing is not accepted. It's probably practiced maybe in sports and at times, but you know when it becomes a work of art, maybe it's considered. I mean, what's the barometer of what we consider as contemporary, right? So, what if you take an old academic form like nude drawing, you know, and would that be contemporary? But I think that's maybe something that we need to really think about. That our art world open enough to accept that? Maybe it doesn't have to be. Contemporary is not the only barometer that measures how good the artwork is. Because I think that what I think is important is that it has to be, I think we need a lot more diversity there just needs to be more in every aspect, including the art.
Yeah.
Okay?
And on that note, we also have a couple other young contemporary artists, and Milenko and Jason Wee and Mike
Suddenly,
Chang,
you know,
Thank
Yang
you.
Yilin.
who have contributed works as a kind of response to the show. So please do have a look at these works that are here as well, and all with different ways of expression, which is really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panel. Thank you, everybody. If you don't mind, just some logistics. We are now going to open our sort of ceremony or our private, our preview with Mr. Kwa Chong Guan as the guest of honor. So please, if we can all move over to the other spaces to give respect to Nama, and do that over there. And then after our sort of 15 minutes with Mr. Kwa Chong Guan, with Nedu, his son, we can then start to eat, if that's okay with everybody.
Wow.
Thank you so much. If we can move. Thank you.
Thank you. Really move.